The shot from a stranger's six-shooter rang through the night, missing Ryder Young's ear by inches as he ducked behind his wagon. This wasn't the first time he'd faced death, it just never got easier, especially now that he had two small lives depending solely on him. The year was 1874, and the unforgiving plains of the Wyoming Territory were no place to raise children, particularly for a man who'd spent most of his life driving cattle and breaking broncos. But when Sarah, his wife of 3 years, died bringing their twins into the world last winter, Ryder had no choice but to become both mother and father to little William and Amelia. Ryder waited until the stranger's footsteps faded into the distance before returning to his small cabin on the outskirts of Promontory Ridge. The settlement had sprung up 5 years earlier, after the Union Pacific and Central Pacific Railroads met nearby. It wasn't much a general store, saloon, blacksmith, and a handful of homes, but it was the closest thing to civilization for 20 miles in any direction. "Mr. Patterson," Ryder called out to his elderly neighbor who'd been watching the twins while he delivered a load of timber to town. "Everything all right," old Patterson emerged from the cabin, wiping his brow with a handkerchief. "Them young uns are finally asleep. Took me 3 stories and a song I ain't sung since my own were babes." He looked at Ryder's disheveled appearance. "Trouble in town." "Some drifter looking to prove himself. Sheriff Daniels handled it." Ryder didn't mention the bullet that had nearly taken his life. No sense in worrying his neighbor. "Well, I best be getting home before the missus sends out a search party." After Patterson left, Ryder quietly entered the cabin and checked on his 8-month-old twins. They slept peacefully in the crib he'd fashioned from an old barrel, their tiny chests rising and falling in perfect rhythm. William with his tuft of black hair like his mother's, and Amelia with the beginnings of auburn curls like his own, his stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since dawn. The larder was nearly empty, a few potatoes, some beans, and a bit of salt pork. The twins would need milk in the morning, and his cow had been giving less each day. He'd have to trade for some from the miller's farm tomorrow. Ryder stoked the fire and set a pot of beans to cook, adding a small piece of salt pork for flavor. As he waited for the food to heat, he sat at the rough-hewn table and pulled out Sarah's journal. He wasn't much for reading, his own education having ended before he turned 12, but he'd been forcing himself to practice with her writings. She'd filled pages with recipes, remedies, and notes about plants and cooking that he hoped might help him care for their children. "Beans should be soaked overnight," he read aloud, grimacing at the hard pellets in his pot. Well, too late for that. He closed the journal, rubbing his eyes. The exhaustion of single fatherhood weighed on him more heavily than any cattle drive ever had. His children deserved better than half-burned beans and a father who couldn't tell a lullaby from a trail song. An hour later, Ryder stared dejectedly at his plate of charred beans. He'd left them on the fire too long while getting lost in his thoughts. Even the dog wouldn't touch them. With a sigh, he dumped the ruined dinner outside and settled for a piece of stale bread he'd been saving. "Your ma would have known how to fix this," he whispered to the sleeping twins. "She would have made something wonderful out of nothing, like she always did." Just as he was about to resign himself to bed hungry, a soft knock came at the door. Ryder tensed, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle propped against the wall. Visitors after dark rarely brought good news in these parts. "Who's there?" he called, keeping his voice low to avoid waking the twins. "Emma Taylor," came a woman's voice. "I've brought you something." Ryder frowned. He knew of Emma Taylor, most everyone in Promontory Ridge did. She'd arrived about 6 months ago, a widow from back east who'd purchased the small bakery from old Mrs. Henderson. He'd seen her in town a few times, always polite but distant. They'd never spoken more than passing pleasantries. Cautiously, he opened the door to find a woman in her mid-20s standing on his porch. She wore a simple blue dress under a woolen shawl, her blonde hair neatly pinned beneath a modest bonnet. In her hands, she held a cloth-covered basket that released a tantalizing aroma into the night air. "Mr. Young," she said with a slight nod, "I hope I'm not intruding." "It's late for social calls, Miss Taylor," he replied, not unkindly but with clear suspicion. She shifted nervously. "Mrs. Patterson mentioned you might be in need of a proper meal. Her husband told her about you being alone with the little ones and—" She gestured to the basket. "I've brought some fresh bread and stew, nothing fancy, but it's warm." Ryder stood speechless. In the 8 months since Sarah's death, neighbors had occasionally brought food, but those gestures had tapered off as everyone returned to their own concerns. No one had come calling this late, and certainly not someone he barely knew. "That's mighty kind," he finally managed, stepping aside to let her in. Emma entered hesitantly, her eyes sweeping over the modest cabin, the unmade bed in the corner, the cluttered table, the dirty dishes piled in a basin. If she judged his housekeeping, her face didn't show it. "I hope beef stew is all right," she said, placing the basket on the table and unwrapping a large loaf of bread that still steamed from the oven. "And there's apple pie for tomorrow." The smell of real food made Ryder's stomach growl audibly. Emma pretended not to notice as she bustled about, finding a clean bowl and spoon without having to ask where they were kept. "Please sit, Mr. Young. You look exhausted." Too hungry to argue, he obeyed, watching as she ladled thick stew into a bowl. The first spoonful nearly brought tears to his eyes. Tender beef, potatoes, carrots, and herbs he couldn't name but recognized from Sarah's cooking. "This is—" "Thank you," he said between bites, manners forgotten in his hunger. Emma smiled softly. "It's no trouble, I always make too much." She glanced toward the crib. "How are they sleeping through the night?" "Not much," Ryder admitted, tearing into the bread. It was soft inside with a perfect crust, nothing like the hard loaves from the general store. "William's got a tooth coming in, keeps them both up." "Chamomile tea might help," she suggested. "Sweetened with just a touch of honey on his gums." He nodded, filing away the advice. "You know about babies?" "I helped raise my younger siblings after my mother passed," she said. 5 of them." A soft whimper came from the crib, followed by a louder cry that threatened to wake the other twin. Ryder sighed and pushed back from the table, but Emma was already moving. "May I?" she asked, hovering near the crib. Ryder hesitated. No one but himself and old Patterson had handled the twins since the midwife left. But there was something about Emma Taylor, a quiet confidence, perhaps, that made him nod his assent. She gently lifted William, who was red-faced and working himself into a proper tantrum. With practiced ease, she cradled him against her shoulder, swaying slightly and patting his back in a rhythmic motion. Within moments, his cries softened to hiccups, then to contented gurgles. "You have a way with him," Ryder observed, amazed. "He just needed a little movement." "Babies like to be rocked." She smiled down at the infant, who was now attempting to grasp a loose strand of her hair. "He looks like you, those eyes especially." "Everyone says they look like their mother," Ryder replied, suddenly feeling the loss of Sarah anew. Emma's expression softened. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. No need to apologize. It's been 8 months, I should be used to it by now." He ran a hand through his hair. "But I'm not, don't know if I ever will be. Grief doesn't work to a schedule, Mr. Young." She continued, rocking William gently. "My husband's been gone 2 years. Some days it feels like yesterday." They fell into silence, the only sounds the crackling fire and William's occasional coo. Eventually, the baby's eyes grew heavy, and Emma returned him to the crib beside his sister, who had slept through the entire exchange. "You should finish your meal while they're quiet," she said, moving toward the door. "I should be getting back to town." "It's too dark for a woman to be out alone," Ryder protested. "The road to town isn't safe." "I have my father's old pistol." Emma patted her pocket with a grim smile. "And I know how to use it." Nevertheless, Ryder insisted on hitching up his wagon to drive her back to town. It was the least he could do after she'd brought him the first decent meal he'd had in weeks. As they traveled the moonlit road, he found himself stealing glances at her profile, wondering what had brought a clearly educated Eastern woman to this harsh territory. "May I ask why you came to Promontory Ridge?" he finally ventured. Emma was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. "After my husband died, there wasn't much left for me in Pennsylvania. My siblings were grown, my parents long gone." She adjusted her shawl against the night chill. I saw an advertisement for a bakery for sale out west, and it seemed like a good opportunity to start fresh. That took courage. Or desperation, she replied with a hollow laugh. Sometimes they look the same. They reached the small building that served as both bakery and Emma's living quarters. A simple sign reading Taylor's Bakery hung above the door. "Thank you for the meal," Ryder said as he helped her down from the wagon. "The twins and I are grateful." "You're welcome, Mr. Young." She hesitated, then added, "If you ever need help with them or another meal, my door is open." Ryder tipped his hat. "Good night, Mrs. Taylor." As he drove back to his cabin, he found himself thinking not of his empty stomach or the children's next feeding, but of the way Emma Taylor had soothed his son with nothing more than a gentle touch and the sound of her voice. The next morning brought the usual chaos of caring for two infants alone. Amelia refused her breakfast, William needed changing twice, and the cow kicked over the milk bucket, spilling half of the precious liquid into the dirt. By midday, Ryder was already exhausted, and he still needed to repair the chicken coop before predators took advantage of the broken slats. He settled the twins on a blanket in the shade of a large oak tree, giving them wooden spoons and cups to keep them occupied while he worked. Every few minutes, he glanced over to ensure they hadn't crawled too far. William had recently mastered the art of mobility and delighted in escaping whenever Ryder's attention wavered. "Stay put, little man," he called as William made a determined effort to reach a butterfly that had landed just beyond the blanket. "Your sister's got the right idea." Amelia was contentedly chewing on a wooden spoon, drool running down her chin. As he hammered a new board into place, his mind wandered to Emma Taylor and her unexpected kindness. The stew had been hearty enough that he'd saved half for today's lunch, and the bread, still soft when he'd sliced it this morning, had made a decent breakfast for him. He wondered if he should pay her a visit in town, perhaps offer to chop wood or make repairs around her bakery as thanks. His thoughts were interrupted by the distant sound of hoofbeats. Ryder immediately dropped his hammer and moved to the twins, scooping one under each arm as he retreated toward the cabin door. Visitors were rare enough that caution was second nature. A buckboard wagon appeared around the bend in the road, driven by none other than Emma Taylor herself. She wore the same blue dress, but had traded her bonnet for a wide-brimmed hat against the midday sun. Beside her on the seat was a covered basket similar to the one from the previous night. Relief washed over him, followed quickly by confusion. Twice in less than a day was beyond neighborly concern. "Mrs. Taylor," he greeted as she pulled the wagon to a stop, "this is unexpected." "I hope I'm not intruding," she said, echoing her words from the night before. "I was delivering bread to the Hendersons' farm and thought I might stop on my way back." She lifted the basket. "I've brought some milk and a custard for the little ones. Mrs. Patterson mentioned your cow's been stingy lately." Ryder shifted the twins in his arms, wondering if the whole town was discussing his domestic challenges. News travels fast. Emma's cheeks colored slightly. "People care about you and the children, Mr. Young. They worry." "Do they send you to check on all their worries, or am I special?" The words came out harsher than he intended, pride making him defensive. Her expression cooled. "I'll leave the basket and be on my way then." As she placed the basket on the ground and turned to climb back into her wagon, William let out a delighted squeal and reached toward her, nearly tumbling from Ryder's grasp. The baby clearly remembered the woman who had soothed him the night before. Ryder's resolve softened. "I apologize, Mrs. Taylor, that was ungracious of me." He adjusted his hold on the squirming twins. "Would you care to come in for coffee? It's the least I can offer after you've driven all this way." The tension in Emma's shoulders eased slightly. "I would like that, thank you." Inside the cabin, Ryder set the twins back on their blanket, this time on the floor near the table. Emma immediately knelt beside them, smiling as Amelia offered her the drool-covered wooden spoon. "Thank you, sweetheart," she said seriously, pretending to take a bite. "Delicious." Amelia giggled, a sound so rare these days that Ryder nearly dropped the coffee pot he was filling at the pump. "She likes you," he observed, setting the pot on the stove. "She's usually shy with strangers." Children can sense when someone enjoys their company, Emma replied, gently tickling William's belly as he crawled onto her lap. While the coffee brewed, Emma unpacked her basket. A jug of fresh milk, a small pot of custard, a loaf of bread even fresher than last night's, and a jar of what looked like fruit preserves. "You didn't need to bring all this," Ryder said, uncomfortable with what felt like charity. "Consider it payment for the coffee," she countered smoothly. "Besides, I need honest opinions on my new recipe," she indicated the preserves. "Blackberry with honey instead of sugar. I'm thinking of selling it at the general store if it's good enough." The simple way she framed the offering as a favor to her rather than to him allowed Ryder to accept without feeling indebted. As they sipped coffee and sampled the preserves, which were indeed exceptional, conversation flowed more easily than he would have expected. Emma told him about her bakery, how she'd been experimenting with local ingredients to replace the more expensive imported ones she'd used back east. Ryder found himself sharing stories of his days as a cattle driver and how he'd saved enough to buy this small homestead just before meeting Sarah. "How did you meet your wife?" Emma asked, helping Amelia stand on wobbling legs. Ryder smiled at the memory. "At a town dance in Cheyenne. I stepped on her toes twice before she took pity and showed me the proper steps." His smile faded. "She was a schoolteacher. Smart as a whip and patient as a saint, she would have known how to raise these two right." Emma was quiet for a moment. "I think you're doing a fine job, Mr. Young." "Ryder," he said suddenly. "Call me Ryder. Mr. Young makes me look around for my father." She smiled. "Then you must call me Emma." The twins eventually grew fussy, ready for their afternoon nap. Emma helped settle them in their crib, humming a lullaby Ryder didn't recognize, but that seemed to work magic on the babies. Within minutes, both were asleep. "You'll have to teach me that song," Ryder said as they stepped outside to avoid waking the children. "It's one my grandmother sang," Emma replied. "I'd be happy to. Perhaps next time." The implication that there would be a next time hung in the air between them, neither acknowledging it directly. "I should be getting back," she said finally. "The afternoon baking won't wait." As Ryder helped her into the wagon, their hands touched briefly. He felt a jolt of something he hadn't experienced since Sarah's early courtship days, a flutter of interest, a spark of connection. "Thank you again," he said, stepping back. "For everything." Emma gathered the reins. "You're welcome, Ryder." He watched her wagon until it disappeared around the bend, wondering what had just happened and what it might mean. The next 2 weeks fell into an unexpected pattern. Every third day, Emma would appear at Ryder's cabin, always with a basket containing some combination of bread, stew, pie, or milk. She claimed various reasons for her visits: a new recipe to test, extra baking she couldn't sell, deliveries to nearby farms that put her in the area, but Ryder began to suspect she was creating excuses to check on them. What surprised him most was how much he looked forward to her visits. The twins clearly did too. They would perk up at the sound of wagon wheels on the road, their little faces lighting with recognition when Emma appeared. She never stayed longer than an hour, but in that time, she filled the cabin with a warmth it had lacked since Sarah's death. She would play with the twins while Ryder attended to chores he couldn't manage with babies underfoot. She taught him how to prepare simple meals that wouldn't burn or stick to the pot. She brought books with colorful pictures for the children and read to them in animated voices that made them coo with delight. On her 4th visit, she arrived to find Ryder attempting to bathe both twins in a large metal tub. Water had splashed everywhere, soap suds clung to his shirt, and William was doing his best to flood the entire cabin floor. "Need some help?" she asked, failing to hide her amusement. "I never thought washing 2 tiny humans could be harder than breaking wild mustangs," he admitted, gratefully accepting her assistance. Working together, they managed to clean both babies, dry them, and dress them in fresh clothes. When Emma's fingers brushed against his as they wrapped Amelia in a towel, Ryder found himself lingering in the contact longer than necessary. If Emma noticed, she gave no indication. As summer progressed into early autumn, the visits increased in frequency. Emma began stopping by every other day, sometimes bringing food, other times just herself. Ryder started making improvements to the cabin, fixing the leaky roof, adding a second window to brighten the interior, constructing a proper table to replace the rickety one they'd been using. "You're nesting," old Patterson observed one day as he helped Ryder install the new window. "Like a bird preparing for winter." "Just making necessary repairs," Ryder insisted, though he knew it was more than that. He wanted the cabin to be welcoming, comfortable, for Emma. On a crisp September morning, Ryder decided it was time to repay some of Emma's kindness. While the twins napped, he hitched his wagon and rode into town with a plan forming in his mind. His first stop was the general store, where he purchased flour, sugar, eggs, and other ingredients he'd seen Emma use in her baking. He added a small sack of hard candies and 2 tiny wooden horses the shopkeeper's son had carved gifts for the twins. His next stop was more difficult. Ryder stood outside Taylor's bakery for several minutes, gathering his courage. Through the window, he could see Emma kneading dough, flour dusting her apron, and a strand of blonde hair escaping her practical bun. She looked up suddenly, as if sensing his presence, and their eyes met through the glass. Her smile of surprise as she came to the door made his heart skip. "Ryder, is everything all right? The twins?" "They're fine," he assured her quickly. "Patterson's watching them." He shifted awkwardly, suddenly feeling foolish with his parcels. "I wondered if you might want to come to dinner tonight, at the cabin." He rushed on before she could respond. "I'll be cooking, or trying to at least. You've been so kind bringing us meals, and I wanted to return the favor." Emma's expression was unreadable for a moment, and Ryder feared he'd overstepped. Then her face softened into a genuine smile. "I would like that very much," she said, "but who's minding your shop?" Emma glanced back at the empty bakery. "It's always quiet this time of day. I can close early." "I don't want to cost you business, Ryder," she interrupted gently. "I would be delighted to come to dinner. What time should I arrive?" They agreed on 6 o'clock, and Ryder left feeling both elated and terrified. What had possessed him to offer to cook when he could barely manage beans without burning them? Back at the cabin, he spent the afternoon in a flurry of activity. He cleaned every surface until it shone, arranged wildflowers in a jar on the table, and even managed to give the twins another bath without flooding the place. Old Patterson watched these preparations with knowing eyes, but said nothing beyond offering to take the twins to his house for the evening. "Mrs. Patterson would love the company," he insisted. "Bring them over before your guest arrives." Ryder hesitated, torn between gratitude for the offer and reluctance to be separated from his children. In the end, practicality won out. It would be easier to focus on cooking without 2 babies demanding attention. At 5 o'clock, he delivered the twins to the Pattersons' cabin, along with detailed instructions about their feeding schedule, favorite toys, and bedtime routine. Mrs. Patterson shooed him away with assurances that they would be fine. "We raised 4 of our own," she reminded him. "These little ones will be well cared for." Alone in his cabin for the first time in months, Ryder faced the daunting task of preparing a meal that wouldn't embarrass him. He had chosen a simple menu: roasted chicken, potatoes, and carrots that seemed difficult to ruin. Following Sarah's instructions from her journal, he seasoned the chicken, placed it in the Dutch oven, and surrounded it with vegetables. Just as he was setting the table, a knock came at the door. Emma stood on the porch, her hair loose around her shoulders and a shawl wrapped around a dress he hadn't seen before, deep green with delicate embroidery at the collar. "You look beautiful," he said before he could stop himself. A blush crept up her cheeks. "Thank you, you clean up well yourself." Ryder had indeed made an effort, shaving carefully and donning his one good shirt, white cotton, that Sarah had insisted he buy for special occasions. He'd even polished his boots. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. "Dinner's almost ready." Emma entered, glancing around the transformed cabin. "Where are the twins?" "With the Pattersons," Ryder explained. "They offered to watch them for the evening." Something like disappointment flickered across her face. "Oh, I brought them each a cookie." She produced a small package from her pocket. "They'll enjoy them tomorrow," Ryder assured her. "And they'll be sorry they missed seeing you." The momentary awkwardness passed as Emma noticed the effort he'd put into the cabin. Everything looks lovely, she inhaled deeply, and something smells wonderful. Ryder gestured for her to sit at the table while he checked on the chicken. To his relief, it was browning nicely without any sign of burning. Perhaps Sarah's journal was working its magic after all. As he served the simple meal, Ryder found himself more nervous than he'd been facing down angry steers or hostile trail gangs. This woman had seen him at his worst, exhausted, disheveled, barely managing to feed himself or his children, yet here she was, accepting his invitation and looking at him with warmth in her eyes. "This is delicious," Emma said after her first bite of chicken. "Did you use rosemary?" "Is that what it's called?" Ryder asked. "I found it in the garden Sarah planted. The journal said it was good with chicken." "Your wife was right," Emma said softly. "She left you good guidance." Ryder nodded, emotion suddenly threatening to close his throat. "She did her best to prepare me, I think, as if she knew somehow." Emma reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "She would be proud of how you've cared for your children, Ryder." The simple touch of her hand sparked something in him, a need for human connection that had been dormant since Sarah's death. Without thinking, he turned his palm upward to hold Emma's hand properly. "I couldn't have managed these past weeks without you," he admitted. "The twins adore you, and I—" He trailed off, unsure how to express what he was feeling. Emma's fingers tightened around his. "I've come to care for them very much," she said carefully, "for all of you." The quiet admission hung in the air between them, full of possibility. Ryder found himself leaning forward slightly, drawn to her in a way he hadn't expected when she first appeared at his door with bread and a smile. A loud pop from the fireplace startled them both, breaking the moment. Emma withdrew her hand and took a sip of water, her cheeks flushed. "Tell me more about your days as a cattle driver," she said, clearly seeking safer conversational ground. "Did you ever encounter outlaws on the trail?" Grateful for the change of subject, Ryder shared stories of his younger days, the thunderstorms that spooked herds into stampedes, the card games around campfires, the strange and beautiful territories he'd crossed. Emma listened attentively, asking questions that revealed her genuine interest. As they ate pie Emma had brought dessert, unable to arrive empty-handed, Ryder found himself curious about her life before Promontory Ridge. "What was your husband like?" he asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. "I'm sorry, you don't need to, it's all right," Emma assured him. "Thomas was a good man, a bookkeeper for a textile mill in Philadelphia." Her fingers traced the rim of her water glass. "He was kind, steady. We were married 4 years when influenza took him. You must miss him terribly." Emma was quiet for a moment. "I do, but not in the way I expected to." She met Ryder's gaze directly. "Is it wrong to admit that while I mourn him, I've realized our marriage was more comfortable than passionate?" Her honesty caught Ryder off guard. "I don't think there's a right or wrong way to grieve," he said finally. "Sarah and I—" He hesitated, searching for the right words. "We loved each other deeply, but we were still learning each other when she died. Sometimes I wonder what our marriage would have become over decades instead of years." "Time changes everything," Emma agreed softly. After dinner, they moved to sit by the fire, the autumn evening bringing a chill to the air. Conversation flowed easily between them, touching on books they'd read, places they'd seen, dreams they still harbored. Emma spoke of expanding her bakery to include a small cafe where travelers could rest. Ryder confessed his hope to breed horses someday when the twins were older. "You could start small," Emma suggested. "One mare, perhaps. The twins would love watching a foal grow." The casual way she projected herself into their future wasn't lost on Ryder. It gave him courage. "Emma," he began, turning to face her directly, "I want to be honest with you. When you first came to my door that night, I was at my lowest point, trying to raise 2 babies alone, failing at even the simplest cooking, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake thinking I could do this by myself." She started to speak, but he gently raised a hand to continue. "You've brought more than food to this cabin. You've brought joy back into our lives. The twins light up when you arrive, and I—" He took a deep breath. "I find myself watching the road on days you might visit, hoping to see your wagon." Emma's eyes glistened in the firelight. I've created excuses to come here, she admitted. Deliveries I could have sent with others, recipes that didn't need testing. Why? Ryder asked, though he thought he knew the answer. Because from the moment I saw you with those babies, doing your best despite everything, I felt drawn to you. She looked down at her hands. I told myself I was just helping a neighbor in need, but it's more than that. Ryder reached for her hands, taking them both in his. I never expected to feel this way again, he said quietly. After Sarah died, I thought that part of me was finished. And now, Emma's voice was barely above a whisper. Instead of answering with words, Ryder leaned forward and kissed her gently. Her lips were soft against his, hesitant at first, then responding with a warmth that sent his pulse racing. When they finally parted, both were breathless. Now, Ryder said, reaching up to touch her cheek, I find myself hoping for a second chance at happiness. With you, if you'll have us a man who can barely cook and 2 babies who will likely run you ragged. Emma laughed softly. I happen to be quite good at cooking, and those babies have already claimed a piece of my heart. Her expression grew serious. But Ryder, I need to know, is there room in your heart for someone new? I would never want to replace Sarah's memory. Sarah will always be the mother of my children, he said honestly. But my heart isn't the same size it was before. It's grown, Emma. There's room for you, a different space, a different love, but no less real. She leaned her forehead against his. Then yes, I'll have you, all 3 of you. They spent the next hour by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes sitting in comfortable silence, their hands intertwined. When the clock struck 9, Emma sighed reluctantly. I should go. The bakery opens early. Ryder knew he should offer to drive her home, but he was reluctant to end the evening. Stay, he said impulsively. Not, he flushed, realizing how it sounded. I mean, it's late and the road is dark. You could take my bed, I'll sleep by the fire. Emma hesitated, clearly torn between propriety and practicality. People would talk. Let them, Ryder said, surprising himself with his boldness. I'm not asking for anything improper, Emma, just your safety and perhaps breakfast with the twins in the morning. In the end, she agreed. Ryder gave her one of his clean shirts to sleep in and a privacy screen Sarah had used for changing. He made himself a pallet near the fire, acutely aware of Emma's presence in his bed just feet away. Ryder, her voice came through the darkness after he'd banked the fire for the night. Yes. Thank you for dinner, it was perfect, he smiled into the shadows. Even though the potatoes were undercooked, her soft laugh warmed him more than the dying embers. Even then. Morning brought a new kind of domesticity to the cabin. Ryder woke at dawn to find Emma already up, stoking the fire and heating water for coffee. She had dressed in yesterday's clothes but left her hair loose down her back. The sight of her moving comfortably around his kitchen, humming softly, filled him with a contentment he hadn't felt in years. Good morning, he said, sitting up from his makeshift bed. Emma turned, a smile lighting her face. Good morning. I hope you don't mind I found eggs and some bacon. I thought we could have a proper breakfast before getting the twins. Together, they prepared a meal that put Ryder's previous attempts at cooking to shame. Emma showed him how to scramble eggs with just a touch of milk to make them fluffy, and how to cook bacon without burning it to a crisp. By the time they sat down to eat, the cabin was filled with delicious aromas and the easy conversation of 2 people growing increasingly comfortable with each other. I should teach you a few simple recipes, Emma suggested as they washed the dishes together. Things you could manage with the twins underfoot. Are you saying my cooking skills need improvement? Ryder teased, flicking water at her playfully. Emma laughed, wiping a drop from her cheek. I'm saying the twins deserve to eat food that isn't charred beyond recognition. After breakfast, they walked together to the Pattersons' cabin to collect William and Amelia. The cool morning air held the promise of autumn, and the trees along the path were just beginning to show hints of gold and crimson. Mrs. Patterson greeted them with raised eyebrows but made no comment about Emma's early morning presence. The twins, who had apparently been perfect angels for the elderly couple, squealed with delight upon seeing both Ryder and Emma. Dada, William exclaimed, reaching for Ryder with pudgy arms. Amelia added clearly, surprising everyone. Emma's hand flew to her mouth. Did she just say your name?" Ryder finished, equally stunned. "I believe she did." The simple word Amelia's first beyond Dada created a shift in the atmosphere. Mrs. Patterson busied herself with gathering the twins' things, hiding what looked suspiciously like a knowing smile. On the walk back to Ryder's cabin, with him carrying William and Emma holding Amelia, neither mentioned the milestone directly. But Ryder caught Emma pressing a kiss to Amelia's head when she thought he wasn't looking, her eyes bright with unshed tears. The next few weeks passed in a blur of growing closeness. Emma began spending most evenings at the cabin, returning to town only to sleep and work at the bakery. She taught Ryder how to prepare simple, nutritious meals for the twins as they transitioned to solid foods. Under her guidance, he learned to make porridge, applesauce, and mashed vegetables that the babies actually ate instead of painting across their faces. In return, Ryder helped at the bakery on days when he could bring the twins to town. He built shelves for her expanding inventory, repaired the leaky roof over her living quarters, and even learned to knead dough under her patient instruction. The townspeople watched this developing relationship with interest, some with approval, others with the typical small-town tendency toward gossip. "They're saying I'm after your homestead," Emma informed him one evening as they sat on his porch, watching the sunset while the twins played at their feet. Ryder snorted. "If they knew how much work this place needs, they'd realize what a poor schemer you are." Emma laughed, leaning against his shoulder. "Others say you're only interested in my baking skills." "Well, there might be some truth to that," he teased, earning a playful swat to his arm. As October turned to November, the weather grew colder. Preparations for winter became Ryder's primary focus, chopping and stacking firewood, making sure the cabin was properly sealed against drafts, preserving the last of the garden's harvest with Emma's help. The twins continued to grow and develop at an astonishing rate. William took his first uncertain steps, and Amelia expanded her vocabulary to include book, pie, and no, the last becoming her favorite word. On a particularly cold evening, with snow threatening in the heavy clouds, Ryder found himself contemplating the future. Emma had returned to town earlier than usual, needing to prepare for a large order at the bakery. The cabin felt emptier without her presence, the twins more difficult to manage alone now that he'd grown used to her help. Old Patterson stopped by with a load of kindling and found Ryder lost in thought, mechanically stirring a pot of stew Emma had left for their dinner. "You've got that look," the elderly man observed, settling his creaking bones into a chair by the fire. "What look is that?" "The one a man gets when he's about to change his life." Patterson accepted the cup of coffee Ryder offered. "Saw it on my own face 43 years ago, right before I asked Mrs. Patterson to marry me." Ryder didn't deny it. The idea had been forming in his mind for weeks. "It's too soon," he said instead. "Sarah's only been gone a year." Patterson sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "Time's a funny thing. Some folks need years to heal, others find their hearts ready sooner. Only you know which kind you are. What would people say?" "Emma deserves better than to be the subject of cruel gossip." "People always talk," Patterson shrugged. "Question is, will you let their wagging tongues decide your happiness?" After the old man left, Ryder sat by the sleeping twins' crib, watching their peaceful faces in the firelight. Sarah would want them to be happy, to have a mother's love. And Emma already loved them, that much was clear in every gentle touch, every song she sang them, every night she stayed late to help with their bedtime routine. But was it fair to ask her to take on two children not her own? To step into a role left vacant by a woman whose memory still filled this cabin. The next morning, Ryder bundled the twins against the cold and drove into town. A light snow had fallen overnight, dusting the landscape with white. His first stop was the general store, where he purchased supplies for the coming storm and made a special order with the shopkeeper's wife, who also handled the mail. His next stop was Taylor's bakery. The warm, yeasty smell greeted him as he entered, along with the sight of Emma serving a customer. Her face brightened when she saw him and the twins. "This is a surprise," she said when the customer had left. I thought you were reinforcing the barn today. Change of plans, Ryder said, setting the twins on the floor where they immediately began exploring the new environment. There's a storm coming. I thought we should stock up. Emma nodded, moving to pick up Amelia before she could reach a sack of flour. I've been baking extra. The last storm kept everyone homebound for 3 days. They spent the morning together in the bakery, Ryder entertaining the twins while Emma filled orders. When the midday lull came, she closed the shop briefly so they could eat lunch in her small living quarters behind the bakery, a single room with a bed, table, stove, and precious few personal belongings. It's not much, she said apologetically, noticing his glance around the sparse room. But it serves its purpose. It's tidy, Ryder observed, unlike my chaos. Emma smiled as she ladled soup into bowls. Your chaos has its charms. After lunch, as Emma prepared to reopen the shop, Ryder found his courage. I've been thinking, he began, helping William with his coat. The cabin gets mighty cold in winter. The twins would benefit from someone there during the day when I'm tending to the livestock. Emma paused in tying her apron. Are you asking me to watch them more often? No, Ryder said, then corrected himself. Well, yes, but not exactly. He took a deep breath. Emma, would you consider moving to the cabin? Permanently, her eyes widened. Ryder, are you asking you to marry me? He finished for her. Yes, though I'm making a mess of it. He set William down and moved to take her hands. I love you, Emma. The twins love you. And I hope you might love us too. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Of course I do, but marriage, are you certain? It's only been, I know how long it's been, he said gently. And I know what I feel. When you're not at the cabin, it's not just the twins who miss you, it's me. I find myself looking for you in every room, listening for your voice, your laugh. People will talk, she whispered, echoing her concern from weeks earlier. Let them, he replied. All I care about is building a life with you, giving the twins a mother who loves them. Being a husband who cherishes his wife. Emma searched his face, perhaps looking for doubt or hesitation. Finding none, she smiled through her tears. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I'll marry you. Ryder pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the emotion he'd held back in previous weeks. The twins, sensing the significance of the moment, abandoned their exploration to wrap themselves around the adult's legs, creating a family embrace. When? Emma asked when they finally parted. As soon as possible, Ryder replied. Before the worst of winter. I've already sent for the necessary papers from Cheyenne. The circuit preacher comes through next week. Emma laughed in disbelief. You were that confident of my answer? Hopeful, he corrected. And prepared. Sarah taught me that much, always be prepared. They agreed to a simple ceremony at the cabin, with just a few close friends as witnesses. Emma would move her bakery business to the cabin temporarily during the winter months, returning to the town location in spring when travel became easier. The news of their engagement spread through Promontory Ridge like wildfire. Most reactions were positive. The Pattersons beamed with satisfaction. The shopkeeper offered a discount on wedding supplies, and several families promised food for the celebration. A few disapproving whispers reached them. Comments about the short period of Ryder's widowhood, but these were overshadowed by the community's general support. The week before the wedding, Emma closed the bakery for a day to move her essential belongings to the cabin. The twins were fascinated by the new trunks and boxes, especially when they discovered Emma's collection of books, many with colorful illustrations. My father was a printer, she explained as Amelia paged through a picture book of animals. He believed every child should have access to books, even girls. Smart man, Ryder replied, helping her arrange her clothes in the chest of drawers he'd built for her. That evening, after the twins were asleep, they sat by the fire discussing practical matters, how to arrange the cabin to accommodate Emma's baking equipment, which days she would travel to town to make deliveries, how to divide the daily chores. We should make a larger crib, Emma suggested. They're outgrowing the barrel. I've been thinking of proper beds, Ryder agreed. Small ones, but with rails to keep them from falling. And perhaps a wall eventually, Emma added, to give them their own space as they grow. The ease with which they planned their shared future felt natural, as if they'd been partners for years, rather than months. When Ryder kissed her goodnight, she was still returning to town to sleep until the wedding. Despite his protests about the cold journey, he felt a contentment that had once seemed beyond his reach. 6 more days, he murmured against her lips. Then you never have to leave again. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, the December sun casting long shadows across the snow-covered landscape. Ryder had been up since before dawn, stoking fires, preparing the cabin, and trying to keep the excited twins from destroying their good clothes before the ceremony. The Pattersons arrived early to help, Mrs. Patterson taking charge of the children while her husband assisted Ryder with last-minute arrangements. Several other neighbors followed, bringing food, flowers preserved from autumn gardens, and good wishes. At precisely noon, a wagon appeared on the road. Emma's friend Clara from the dressmaker's shop, serving as her attendant for the day. Ryder's heart nearly stopped when Emma descended from the wagon, dressed in a simple but elegant blue dress with white lace at the collar and cuffs. Her blonde hair was arranged in soft curls around her face, a few small white flowers woven into the style. "You're beautiful," he whispered when she reached him on the porch. "And you're handsome," she replied, straightening his collar, "though you look terrified." "Not terrified," he corrected. "Overwhelmed. I never thought I'd be this fortunate twice in one lifetime." The preacher arrived shortly after, and the small gathering assembled in the cabin's main room. William and Amelia, now 15 months old, were held by the Pattersons, though William squirmed to be put down throughout the ceremony. The vows were simple and heartfelt. Ryder promised to cherish Emma, to support her dreams, to be a true partner in all aspects of life. Emma promised to love not only Ryder but his children as her own, to build a home filled with warmth and compassion, to stand by him through whatever challenges life presented. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Ryder kissed his bride to the applause of their friends and the delighted squeals of the twins, who seemed to understand that something important had just occurred. The celebration that followed was modest but joyful. Neighbors had brought enough food to feed twice their number: roasted venison, baked hams, pies, cakes, and breads. Emma's contribution was a magnificent wedding cake decorated with sugared berries she'd preserved from summer. As afternoon turned to evening, guests gradually departed, leaving the newly formed family alone in their cabin. The twins, exhausted from the excitement, fell asleep earlier than usual, leaving Ryder and Emma to their first moments of privacy as husband and wife. "Are you happy?" Ryder asked as they sat by the fire, her head resting on his shoulder. "Completely," Emma replied, tilting her face up for his kiss. "Though I'm already wondering how early the twins will wake us tomorrow." Ryder laughed softly. "Welcome to parenthood, Mrs. Young." "I wouldn't have it any other way," she assured him, and he knew she meant it. Winter passed in a blur of domestic contentment. The cabin, once merely functional, became truly a home under Emma's influence. She arranged her baking equipment in the kitchen area, set up a small work table by the new window where the light was best, and filled every available shelf with books, cooking implements, and small touches that reflected her personality. The twins thrived with the constant attention of 2 parents. Their vocabulary expanded rapidly under Emma's patient teaching, and their personalities grew more distinct: William bold and adventurous, Amelia thoughtful and observant. They began referring to Emma as Mama within weeks of the wedding, a development that brought tears to her eyes the first time she heard it. Ryder found unexpected joy in watching his wife and children together. Emma taught the twins songs and games he'd never known, read to them from her collection of books, and involved them in simple baking projects that invariably left the kitchen dusted with flour but filled with laughter. In turn, Ryder showed Emma the skills he'd developed over years of self-reliance: how to track animals in the snow, how to predict weather changes by watching the sky, how to repair tools with limited supplies. Their different backgrounds and experiences complemented each other in ways that strengthened their partnership. Emma's bakery business continued to thrive despite its temporary relocation. Twice weekly, Ryder would drive her and a wagon full of baked goods into town, where eager customers quickly purchased everything she'd prepared. The income supplemented what they earned from Ryder's small herd of cattle and occasional carpentry work, allowing them to save for future expansions to both the homestead and the bakery. As winter gave way to spring, they began planning in earnest. Emma wanted to return the bakery to town, but add a small cafe where travelers could rest and enjoy a proper meal. Ryder hoped to acquire a breeding pair of horses, the first step toward his dream of raising quality stock. "We could build a proper addition to the cabin," Ryder suggested one evening as they discussed the future. "A separate bedroom for the twins, maybe another for," he hesitated. "For future children," Emma finished with a smile. She had noticed his glances toward her midsection in recent weeks, though she'd shown no signs of pregnancy yet. "If you want that," he said carefully. "I wouldn't presume I do want it," she assured him, "very much when the time is right." The time proved right sooner than either expected. By late April, Emma confirmed what Ryder had begun to suspect: she was with child, due in late autumn. "The twins will be almost 2, she calculated, old enough to understand a bit about a new baby. Ryder pulled her into his arms, overwhelmed with emotion. "Are you happy about this?" "Terrified and elated in equal measure," she admitted. "But yes, very happy." She looked up at him uncertainly. "And you?" "I never thought I could be this fortunate," he said honestly. "To find you, to see you love my children as your own, and now to create a new life together. It's more than I dared hope for." The months that followed were busy with preparations both for the baby and for their expanding businesses. Emma reopened the bakery in town, hiring Clara from the dressmaker's shop to help several days a week. Ryder purchased a promising mare from a breeder passing through the territory, the first investment in his future horse business. Construction began on the cabin addition, with neighbors helping to raise the frame and roof before summer's heat made such work unbearable. By August, the twins had moved into their new room, filled with the small beds Ryder had crafted and colorful quilts Emma and Mrs. Patterson had sewn together. As Emma's pregnancy progressed, Ryder found himself more protective than he'd been during Sarah's. Perhaps it was the memory of loss that made him anxious, or simply the deepening of his love for the woman who had transformed their lives. "You're hovering again," Emma observed one afternoon as he insisted on carrying a basket of laundry she was perfectly capable of managing. "I'm helping," he corrected, though they both knew it was more than that. Emma's belly had grown prominently by October, the baby active and strong according to the midwife who visited regularly. The twins were fascinated by the changes in their mother, placing small hands on her stomach to feel their siblings' movements and peppering her with questions she answered with remarkable patience. "Baby come out?" William would ask nearly daily. "Soon," Emma always replied. "When the first snow falls." As if on cue, the first snowflakes began to drift from the sky on the evening of November 15th. Emma was preparing dinner, the twins playing with wooden blocks on the floor, when she suddenly gasped and gripped the edge of the table. "Ryder," she called, her voice steady despite the pain evident on her face. "It's time to send for Mrs. Patterson." The next 12 hours passed in a blur of activity. Old Patterson rode for the midwife while Ryder settled the twins with a neighbor who had offered to take them. By the time he returned to Emma's side, her labor had progressed significantly. Unlike with Sarah's difficult delivery, everything proceeded as it should. Emma was strong and prepared, breathing through contractions with determination. The midwife, an experienced woman who had delivered most of the children in the region, expressed no concerns. Still, Ryder couldn't help but remember those terrible hours with Sarah, her pain, her weakening pulse, the moment when the midwife's expression had told him everything was lost even before the words were spoken. "Stop worrying," Emma said during a brief respite between contractions, reaching for his hand. "This is not the same. I am not Sarah." "I know," he said, pressing a kiss to her damp forehead, "but I can't lose you." "You won't." she promised with a conviction that somehow reassured him despite the circumstances. As dawn broke over the snow-covered landscape, Emma's cries gave way to a new sound, the lusty wail of a healthy baby entering the world. The midwife placed the infant on Emma's chest, a tiny girl with a dusting of blonde hair and her mother's delicate features. "She's perfect," Ryder whispered, overcome with emotion as he counted tiny fingers and toes. "Rebecca," Emma said, looking up at him. "After my mother." "Unless you had another name in mind, Rebecca Young," Ryder repeated, testing the name. "It's beautiful, like her." When the twins returned that afternoon, wide-eyed and curious about the new arrival, the family circle was complete. William approached the baby cautiously, while Amelia immediately assumed a protective stance, announcing to everyone that this was our baby and they must be careful. Emma watched with tears in her eyes as Ryder guided the twins in gently touching their new sister's hand. "Look what we've built together," she said softly. "A family," Ryder agreed, his heart so full it felt it might burst. The next few months brought the expected challenges of integrating a newborn into their already busy household. Rebecca proved to be a content baby, rarely fussing except when hungry or tired. The twins, now approaching their second birthday, were fascinated by their sister and eager to help in their limited capacity. By spring, life had settled into a new rhythm. Emma divided her time between the bakery, which continued to thrive under her management even with reduced hours, and caring for the children. Ryder's horse breeding venture showed promise, with the mare expecting a foal and negotiations underway for a suitable stallion. On a warm June afternoon, 5 years to the day since Sarah had died bringing the twins into the world, Ryder stood at the small marker he'd placed for her at the edge of their property. Emma joined him, Rebecca asleep in her arms while the twins gathered wildflowers nearby. "I wish she could see them," Ryder said quietly. "How they've grown, how happy they are." "I believe she can," Emma replied, shifting the baby to her other arm, "and I think she would be pleased with the life you've built for them." Ryder turned to look at his family, the twins with their dark hair and serious expressions so like Sarah's, baby Rebecca with Emma's features, and Emma herself, the woman who had appeared at his door when he needed her most. "Thank you," he said simply. Knowing she would understand all he meant by those words, Emma smiled, the same warm smile that had accompanied the bread she'd brought on that fateful night nearly 2 years ago. "For what? Loving you, loving them, that's the easiest thing I've ever done." As they walked back to the cabin together, the twins running ahead with their flowers, Ryder reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the depths of grief and the chaos of trying to raise 2 infants alone, to the fullness of the life they now shared, it had all begun with a knock on the door, a loaf of bread, and a smile that had lit up his darkest hour. Inside, the twins were already chattering about the evening meal, asking if they could help prepare it. Emma handed the still sleeping Rebecca to Ryder and tied on her apron, inviting William and Amelia to wash their hands if they wanted to assist with the biscuits. As Ryder watched them work together at the table, Emma guiding small hands in measuring flour, the twins concentrating with comical seriousness, he felt a completeness he had once thought beyond his reach. Rebecca stirred against his chest, her tiny hand grasping his finger even in sleep. This was his family now, not the one he had originally envisioned, but one created through loss and hope, through chance encounters and deliberate choices, through the courage to open his heart again when he thought it permanently broken. "What are you thinking about?" Emma asked, noticing his thoughtful expression. "How lucky I am," Ryder replied, "and how grateful that you knocked on my door that night." "The best decision I ever made," Emma said, flour dusting her cheek where William had accidentally patted her with powdery hands. "Though I'm still not convinced those beans were actually inedible." "They were beyond saving," Ryder laughed. "Ask the dog, even he wouldn't touch them." As the family gathered around the table that evening, the cabin filled with the aromas of Emma's cooking and the sounds of the children's chatter, Ryder offered a silent prayer of thanks for second chances, for unexpected blessings. and for the woman who had taught him that life's most precious ingredients were love, patience, and the courage to begin again.